My name is Tara Shishtarian, and I am a South Asian guest settler on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations here in Burnaby. I am the co-chair of WeCan and your MC today. I got such a good report card from you all that I got bumped up. But jokes aside, before we proceed, I would like to inform everybody that the event is being recorded, so you can turn off your cameras if you like. The breakout rooms, however, will not be recorded. At this time, we would request everyone to introduce themselves via the chat function, your name, pronouns optional, the territory you're joining from, and the group you are representing, also optional. Please stay muted and use the chat function to have a conversation amongst yourselves, which we very much encourage. If you need help, you can message Mari or Alison, who will ably assist you if you have any technical problems using the chat feature. Both of their Zoom names include tech support. So before we begin, let's start us in a good way. WeCan acknowledges Canada as the land of the First Peoples, the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We therefore acknowledge and honor the treaty lands and the unceded traditional territories on which we all reside, work, and recreate on. We are grateful for Indigenous knowledge and ways of being as we unlearn and learn the history of so-called Canada. Those of us who are settlers at WeCan continue to evolve in the process and responsibility of reconciliation and become good allies and accomplices in the implementation of DRIPA, Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which we would like to remind our governments of as well. Indigenous communities are at the forefront of climate action, and to be in solidarity with them is critical. When we truly listen to the guardians and stewards of this land, we can then recognize rights of nature in our constitution like Ecuador. So before we begin, the CAPA planning team would like to reiterate our oversight in scheduling this event on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and apologize that some folks may not be able to attend at this time. We wish you a splendid New Year. We equally apologize for our inadvertent oversight of days of significance and celebration to other religious denominations and cultural communities in the past, and will sincerely strive not to repeat this in the future. So what is the purpose of our CAPA today? It is to bring together climate group representatives, activists, and advocates to connect, coordinate with, and support each other. This CAPA in particular, we are focusing on building solidarity between climate activists and movements that intersect with climate. We know that issues of injustice such as colonization, racism, classism are some of the causes of the climate crisis, and that marginalized communities are disproportionately impacted. We also know that the real solutions to climate are solutions that benefit everyone. Let's use today as an opportunity for learning and finding the intersecting issues so that we can move forward together. So I'll give you a quick run through of the agenda. The event will go on until noon. We will start with a brief overview of what WeCan is about from Guy Donsi, our co-chair, and then hear from our brilliant guest speaker, Anjali Appadurai. Much of the CAPA will be in facilitated breakout groups based around 6 issues that intersect with climate. You will be able to choose which group to go to. After the breakout groups, there will be a brief report back from each group. Then we will have a quick closing. Over to you, Guy.
Greetings. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tara. And I'm going to give a little quick overview of WeCan. So we have 200 member organizations, possibly including all the members and supporters, some 250,000 people. We helped to get 146 climate champions elected to local government in 2022. And so, yes, we can solve the climate crisis as our deep and committed conviction. This is a reality that, as Banksy expresses, what young people are feeling about the world today. And on top of that, they're looking at the biodiversity crisis, housing, racial injustice, anxiety, all these issues, which is why we're looking to build solidarity today and acknowledge all these other issues. This is yesterday's climate march protest in Victoria. And this is yesterday's in, why is it not moving on? In Vancouver. So kudos to everyone who was there who joined this in. This was produced early this morning by the Western Canada Wilderness Committee as their vision of the world we're working for. And there's far too much material here to go into. They only launched this an hour ago, but I'm sure we'll be sharing this in our newsletter this coming Friday. So we recently, this week, we wrote a big open appeal to Premier Eby and all MLAs, imploring you to act with more urgency. You can find the letter on our website. It's been delivered by mail and by email, and we know in person to David Eby's office so that they all get to read it. This is the state of the climate movement as I see it briefly. We have ourselves and our member organizations, solidarity movements, green journalists, green businesses, and green councils, all putting pressure by protests, lobbying pressure on local councils, on the NDP government, the MLAs and their staff, on businesses and banks. But this pushback from the conservative politicians and journalists, from the oil and gas companies, the banks, from the climate deniers and delayers. So we have to convert all that into success. That's the summary of our movement, and I will hand it over back to Tara.
Thank you, Guy, for that succinct and eloquent introduction, as always, and keeping us up to date with all the climate news. I am now excited to introduce Anjali Appadurai. Anjali Appadurai is a climate justice organizer and communicator. She got her start as a young activist in the global campaign to demand climate justice, a network of global South-based social movements working to ensure that social movements' demands were heard in the halls of power at the UN. Today, Anjali is rooted at home in BC and runs the Padma Center for Climate Justice, a project that brings together diaspora communities to build power around issues of climate and economic justice.
Pardon me?
She has worked with West Coast Environmental Law to build a campaign to hold fossil fuel companies accountable. That is known as Sue Big Oil. She has also worked with Sierra Club BC and is now campaigns director of the Climate Emergency Unit. She has also engaged with the electoral system, running as an NDP candidate in the 2021 federal election and as a candidate in the 2022 BC NDP leadership race. Also a musician in her spare time, Anjali hopes to weave politics and art together to reflect the times we are living in and galvanize true collective action. Over to you, Anjali, with much applause.
Thanks so much for that intro, Tara. Thanks for being such a gracious host. Thank you so much to all the folks at WeCan for pulling this gathering together. It's such a big and hopeful space. And thank you so much for inviting me to be with you here today. I'm just here to give a few words to all of you before you embark on this assembly, this much needed solidarity assembly, where we deepen our understanding of this multifaceted, deep challenge, the climate crisis, and where we build new solidarities and new alliances and a deeper understanding of what we're up against. I first want to acknowledge that I'm also calling in from the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh lands. I'm in Vancouver as well. And I also want to acknowledge yesterday's climate march. Who was there? Put your hand up if you were at the march yesterday. It was such a beautiful energy. It was joyful. It was inclusive. There was amazing art, amazing music. Yeah, so many hands. And one thing that I noted that was so different from previous marches was that the youthful energy was just palpable. Young people were up ahead leading the march with so much energy that at times we had to be like, okay, slow down the front of the march. The young people are too joyful and too energetic. They're going too far ahead. And the other thing that was new is one of the ways in which we've seen this incredibly diverse movement grow and change over the years is that now we're seeing in recent years a lot of other demands alongside the core demand for climate action now. And we're seeing things like climate justice as racial justice, and the official slogan for yesterday's global march, which was fast, fair, and forever. And that's a new one. And I love to see it because I think it's a good sign that our movement is getting stronger and it's growing. To me, where I got my start in understanding the climate crisis and in my current work, the climate crisis calls for a fundamentally interconnected internationalist approach. And we haven't really seen popular support for a truly internationalist approach to this crisis in Canada, or to any crisis in Canada, since decades ago, since the anti-war movement, really. It's something that I think today's climate justice movement is beginning to embrace. And I really hope that we accelerate that, because fundamentally, this crisis is an interconnected global one that reminds us that borders aren't real, that these artificial lines, these structures of power that we've built around us are not real and can be transcended by us as people's movements if we so choose. So I just want to do, I want to start at the beginning of the struggle for climate justice, just to tie together all the different groups that you're going to be working in today, all these different wonderful breakout groups, and try to draw a through line between all of them, and try to draw a through line between the different solidarities that we need to unite if we're going to win this thing. And so this is something that you all probably know. So here's a refresher. Climate crisis kickstarted by the Industrial Revolution. That great industrial period took place in North America and in Europe, the countries that are today called the developed world. And what enabled such prosperity that we now enjoy today in the developed world, it was two major things. It was genocide and land theft of Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island and all over the world. And it was the transatlantic slave trade from the African continent. And today, Africa, the entire continent, has contributed a tiny 2% of global emissions, but continues to face some of its worst impacts. So the two basic ingredients of wealth and of global capitalism, land and labor, were both stolen by today's industrialized nations and built upon to create the society that we now live in. That was the basis and the foundational formula for today's crisis. So these nations then industrialized, spewed carbon into the atmosphere, and began the greenhouse effect that is causing the global crisis today. And so when you view it through this historical lens, we see that we cannot separate climate change from the deep injustice that caused it and continues to drive it. That land theft and genocide is an ongoing project across the world, and Indigenous peoples are not only facing the worst impacts of the climate crisis, but are also on the front lines of many of the solutions. And that's really the poetry of the climate crisis, is that its actual solutions are also the solutions to the deep divides caused by colonialism, imperialism, and the forced spread of global capitalism. We actually win by confronting those things and not by avoiding them. And in a time of crisis, which we're all feeling today, it's hard for us to stop and to breathe and to look deeper into the heart of it. There's so much urgency. There are so many bad policies to fight. There are so many good policies to fight for. It's hard for us to think about slowing down and getting into the deep root of it rather than addressing the surface symptoms. And that's exactly why an assembly like today's is so valuable and so necessary. And I'm really looking forward to diving into the groups with all of you after this. The truth of it is, that's the only way that we win. We can only win by uniting our struggles and by finding the threads that connect the climate crisis to other movements for social and economic justice. They're all symptoms of the same disease, after all. Social movements around the world have a long history, actually, of winning big victories by connecting social and economic struggles to major crises. In the 30s in the United States, the New Deal policies that came after the Depression of 1929 are a good example of that. And more recently here in Canada, social programs that were enacted after World War II are another good example of that. It's hard to think about, I work with the Climate Emergency Unit, where we actually use the wartime mobilization as a useful tool for thinking about how to mobilize for the climate crisis. Obviously, using a war as a metaphor for climate action is complicated and nuanced, but I do think that there are a lot of lessons that we can draw from that mobilization. Since it was the last time, the pandemic being the next time after that, that society was encouraged by leadership, by top-down leadership, to enter a grand undertaking together, to really come together in a grand and united way. And there were some parts of that are very useful examples for today. So one of these examples is that the wartime, one of the cultural pieces that was promoted during the wartime was that the society that people would come back to after the war was to be fairer, safer, and more equitable than the society going into the war. And that promise was what created a lot of the social solidarity that was needed to go through the crisis together. There were fundamental economic policies put in during that time. There were wage and price controls. There was an excess profits tax that, after a certain point, would cap at 100% of corporate profits for corporations that were creating goods for the wartime. It was there was a sense that people needed to be okay during this crisis, and we needed to be able to come back after the war with more equal opportunity for everyone. It's only by linking all these issues that affect the issues that affect all of our lives, like inequality, like affordability, that we can mobilize broad enough support to actually win this thing. We need to meet people where they're at, speak to their life experiences, and never assume that simply telling them the facts will move them to action. And so a huge part of that is trust. If we're going to win, we need to be able to trust each other. Those who are at the margins of this crisis, who are made to feel the worst impacts, who are falling through the cracks, and who aren't taken care of as society moves to a more and more polarized place. We need to be able to trust that the climate movement actually has our backs. Folks need to be able to trust that the climate movement is looking out for everyone, so that we are actually moving towards a society that's fairer than the one that created this crisis in the first place. Research actually shows that societies with lower levels of economic inequality are also the ones where bolder climate action is possible. And the inverse of that is also true. So let's make no mistake, the climate villains of the world, the carbon consuming elite, the richest governments and corporate actors in the world, they require inequality to prop up this economic system that we find ourselves in. It's a twisted sort of modern day blood sacrifice, our lives for their profit. We have to understand what we're up against. And we have to understand that inequality is not just a side product of the climate crisis. It is a fundamental ingredient of it. Power will never give itself up. Power holds on for dear life until it's forced to concede. And that's our job as people's movements, and only if we understand what we're up against. So one other facet of this crisis that I want to talk about is what I alluded to in the beginning, which is climate justice as an internationalist lens. The international lens of climate justice calls upon us to link our struggles to that of every single person around the world and to recognize that our fates are intertwined. And so we can't let our government distract us with incremental crumbs of policies while they pour literal gasoline on the crisis in other parts of the world. When it comes to global climate change, 60% of Canada's climate obligations actually take place in other parts of the world through climate finance, through loss and damage finance, and other supports to the developing world that has been subject to a crisis that they had a very small part in creating. Climate change knows no borders. It's all the same greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's not an option for us to focus on an energy transition at home without examining our role in the global community. And the way we do that is by standing in solidarity with movements around the world. Tomorrow, for example, is a global march for migrant rights. Migrant justice is climate justice. The violent system of borders is the infrastructure that holds up the climate accelerating powers of the world. It creates the scarcity and the inequality required for this economic system to continue. And so by going deeper, by examining how other struggles for justice have operated, what their demands are, what they're calling for, the society that they're looking to create, that's how we create the solidarity needed to actually build the broad-based, big tent support that we need to win on climate. And so I think we all are feeling that we're entering into a very difficult time. I don't know if folks have seen recent polling that shows that the Conservatives have a head and shoulders lead right now. That's the first time in my lifetime for sure, and I think in many people's lifetimes here that that's actually happened, where across the board, even for younger generations, people are being drawn to the right. And it's scary and divisive rhetoric that is drawing people in. There are simple and clear stories of the world that people like Pierre Poilievre are telling that are appealing to people and drawing them in. And when there's fear and uncertainty, which there is right now, where we have unaffordability at one of the highest points that it's ever been, it creates the conditions for hate to take root and grow. The only antidote to that is a politics of solidarity, which is a politics of great love. And so that solidarity is not only necessary for us to win, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the glue that binds us together. It's what creates a movement that is diverse, that is inclusive, that is accepting, that draws people in, that tells them that their lived experiences are valid and real, and that paints a picture of a much better world that everybody gets to live in together. And so I wish you all well as you go into the assembly today. I'll be there with you for part of it. I thank you for being here and for doing this work, for being so committed to this great struggle that we're all in together. This is the work of our lives, and I'm so proud to be doing it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anjali, for your incredible words and the truths that you've highlighted and told us, and for all your dedication to climate justice, bringing communities, bridging communities, and building alliances. We will now do our breakout groups. You will be able to choose which of the 6 groups you would like to attend to in a minute. Before that, Mari is going to link some discussion guidelines in the chat, and I encourage everyone to read over them carefully. They include recommendations such as, if you're someone who speaks often, like me, trying to listen more, speaking from your own experience, and participate with an open mind, curiosity, and self-reflection. Now, over to you, Mari, to channelize us into the different discussion groups. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Anjali and Tara. I'm excited to share with you how to get into your breakout groups today. So Guy has shared the 6 breakout groups that we will be hearing from. Oh, I just realized I need to spotlight myself so you can see me. Here we go. So we will be going into these 6 breakout groups now. And each group will include speakers as well as a facilitated discussion. There will be a facilitator and a note taker so we can gather up all the good ideas shared and send them out afterwards. I'm going to put a link in the chat right after this in case any of the note takers don't have the document that they need. There's a link with all of them in it. No one else needs to worry about that. Note takers, you know who you are. In a minute, a button will pop up at the bottom of your screen, allowing you to see the breakout rooms available. You may choose to go into the breakout room that you registered for, or if you've changed your mind and there's one that you're interested in, especially one that has less people in it, there might be room for more discussion. You should be able to see how many people are in each group as you join. Click on the breakout rooms button and then click the join button next to the breakout group that you'd like to join. And if you're not able to join a breakout group, no worries, I will get you where you want to go. Just hang tight, be patient, and I'll ask folks who are still in the main room where they'd like to go once we get folks in. Okay, I'm gonna open the rooms now. We'll be back in about an hour for report backs.
So thank you all so much for participating in those conversations. I know we had a lovely breakout session. We will now have a quick report back from each breakout group so that we all get to hear a bit from the groups we are all missed out on. Could each note taker or facilitator please share the 3 to 5 most important points from your group in about 3-ish minutes? So I think I'll pass it on to Sebastian from the Labor and Climate Crisis Group.
Great. So hello, everybody. As Tara just said, I was the note taker for the Labor Breakout Group. And so we had speakers from the BCGEU, BCTF, and Worker Solidarity Network present a range of activities on divestment and worker education, as well as explicit campaigns around the intersection of climate and labor. And sort of from this, we developed the first theme, which is that workers and unions need to be met where they are at. It was expressed in many different ways, but the workers have needs of their own, and those needs to be met, and they should not bear the brunt of the economic burden or economic hurdles that may come from a just transition. Indeed, some of the just transition plans might not look so just from the point of view of workers. So this is the idea that kind of leads into the idea that coalitions need to be real or organic and not forced, right? They need to be based on actual mutual areas of concern. It was also discussed that workers sort of are people apart from just being part of their union, right? So they have multiple issues of concern, not just their sort of workers' rights, but also, you know, climate and LGBTQ plus and anti-racism, as represented by the fact that unions have these sort of committees that deal with these sorts of things. It was also discussed that sort of climate orgs can reach out to union members in their own ranks, right, and have them influence their own unions. Workers can even run for leadership positions to really sort of make a huge impact on their unions. And the last sort of theme that we developed was the idea that organizing works and is fundamental. Major changes only end up working with organizing. It was suggested that some of the major changes in the auto workers union took decades of organizing to make. So as part of this theme, there were some stories shared also about climate groups showing up for unions. So it was suggested that solidarity is a two-way street. Bringing shareholder motions to shareholder meetings was also sort of something that could be done in this sort of solidarity building exercise. So those are the sort of 4 key takeaways, and those are in the notes that I'm sure will be distributed later.
Thank you, Sebastian. And now could I please ask Eric from the Poverty and Housing in the Climate Crisis Group to report back? Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, delighted to. So we covered a lot of ground. This is a very complex, interconnected set of issues, obviously. And so we heard from Poverty Reduction Coalition, the Nanaimo Heat Pumps Campaign, ACORN, which is a tenant-led movement to protect affordable housing in Surrey, and the East Kootenay Climate Hub. I believe I caught everyone there. Without, I mean, it would be impossible to go into detail. There was a lot of ground covered, and I think we were only able to scratch the surface. But some of the key takeaways I got were to start out with that climate justice, poverty, and housing are deeply interconnected, and it is not possible to solve them in isolation. So if we look at equity-seeking groups, low income or people in less affordable housing situations, these are the groups of people that are the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And they're also subject to landlords that may be more profit-oriented. And so these are the same people who are less likely to have access to heat security technologies, such as heat pumps, which are gaining in popularity for good reason. And there's a lot of intersection also with building maintenance issues. We heard of a lot of advocacy around tenants who do not have access to, like they have mold problems. So then you put a fan in your apartment and you're blowing mold around. So these things are interconnected. I thought that was a very good example that illustrated the problem. So we've got advocacy groups that are fighting for tenant protections and local bylaw improvements. One example that was brought forward was landlord licensing. And we also heard from a group that's doing this, from Acorn that's in Surrey that's doing this as part of a broader initiative. We spent quite a bit of time talking about heat pumps, and there's a lot to talk about there. It's an important part of the solution. Profiteering is getting in the way of affordability at the moment. And without going into too much detail of why that's happening, a couple of examples came, like, for example, the approved installers list that they have that kind of contributes to and encourages some price gouging. So we talked about some more equitable rebates, changing the rebate schemes to be more equitable, for example, on the unit cost per unit of energy, rather than flat rate on installation, making it based on the unit cost rather than the installation cost. And also we heard from a group that's forming a do-it-yourselfers heat pump co-op. They're in the early planning stages, looking for funding and partners that's going to help tackle the affordability problem of heat pumps by circumventing some of that price gouging that you see, and encouraging local groups, homeowners, and do-it-yourselfers, handyman to be able to do that at a fraction of the cost. So, and then we also heard some rumors that property assessed clean energy programs might be coming. So there's some financial models as well that we can look to. That's my 3 minutes.
Thanks, Eric. Am I on? And now could we hear from Lily from the Climate and Racial Justice Group?
Hi. So we had a really engaging dialogue with 3 presenters, Leonie Smith, Lama Magua, and Anjali Appadurai. The key takeaways, we did in rounds where the one speaker after the other. We looked at what does it mean actually what are the racial justice issues that each of the speakers wanted the BC climate movement to show up in solidarity for, and then how do we actually create that solidarity? The key takeaways, the first one is that the climate movement that we are working in today comes out of the very traditional environmental movement, which focused mostly on land conservation. And that focus is built from a story of land theft. To racialized and marginalized communities, the climate movement is often seen as a movement of privileged white people. So what can we do about this? Well, one idea that's talked about was it's time for us to try new things, to step outside of our comfort zone, to do more than just show up at the climate actions. For example, show up the struggles that affect people's lives, like marching for migrant issues, housing issues, and find intersectionality between their issues and the issues that we are pushing. Find buffering institutions that we belong to, that we are familiar with, and work with, and bring the climate crisis to that discussion. So a buffering institution would be your own workplace or your professional association, or WeCan is a buffering institution, neighbor houses, faith communities. Climate activists need to think carefully about the connections between the movements, and also to understand that working together will be very difficult, that conflicts and tensions will show up. It's not just showing up and we're all going to be happy and take on each other's issues. We actually need to think carefully and set up ways for intentional listening to each other, to find ways of dealing with conflict. And we need to give time, including time to take care of ourselves. Individually, we talked about how would you make a linkage between a particular situation in our own lives and our busy lives and things that we worry about, which is things like food security, housing, safety, and the broader climate issues. And to look at what are the opportunities for engagement that would fit our real life situations, and it's within our own comfort level. Not all of us would want to show up at the strike or be able to sign on to a letter. But on an organizational and societal level, we have to work on changing the infrastructure that has been built through inequity and injustice. And to do that, we need to do a lot more work in understanding how our different movements intertwine. That's my report. Thanks.
Thanks, Lily. And can I now ask Douglas to please give us a wrap up about the Indigenous and Climate Justice Group? Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Tara. We had 4 speakers in our group: Janelle Lapointe from the David Suzuki Foundation, Jim Layden from Mountain Protectors, Michael Leach from the Statmic Tribal Council, and Coopsie Judy Wilson sent a video from New York that we had a chance to view. And I think we did what we needed to do in that we mainly listened to the Indigenous worldview. There were lots of issues discussed about problems with our governmental system and our colonial system not matching up with the real needs of humanity and the planet, and need to work on our relationship with each other and the planet. The key takeaway points. So one is a very currently contentious, but also somewhat obvious issue, and that is what's referred to as red washing, which is the corporations taking advantage of impoverished Indigenous communities, calling it Indigenous reconciliation and economic reconciliation, when really it's just the next step of their process. And this is very difficult to deal with, and there's examples in the press of the discussion and sides back and forth. The other thing we learned was Indigenous people look at climate change as cycles changing and not just climate change. And there's a lot of Indigenous prophecy and legends and things that have happened that match up with that. And so there was a lot of discussion about the different worldviews, but common to all of the things was that there's only one Mother Earth, that the climate crisis is a spiritual crisis, that we need healing, and that there's a lot we can learn from Indigenous people. And in fact, they should probably lead this. And that we'll only get through this with unity. So I've taken quite extensive notes, and those will be available to people who want to look at them. But it was a pretty moving session. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Doug, for that excellent overview. And now I'll pass it on to Catherine for the Faith and Religious Group.
Great. Mute.
Sorry,
You're
Catherine.
muted.
We were playing unmute and mute game.
Okay. We had 4 presenters in our faith group: Julia Roberts from Green Faith, Amal Abdullah from Green Ummah, Satvir Kaur from Eco Sikh, and Dinjat, whose last name is escaping me at the moment, from Khalsa Aid. it was really quite inspiring to hear from the faith groups who are doing work on climate. There was an amazing amount of congruence in what the different groups are doing, and it offers us the opportunity to share information and resources among these people to improve what's already being done. Two areas that or the areas that came up again and again were around maintaining water quality, disaster response, and using local species to rebuild degraded environments. It was pointed out that local faith groups are often able to act more swiftly than governments in response to climate disasters, and they may also remain on the ground long after governments have left to sustain recovery more effectively. And because they're local and they know the local issues better, responses from faith groups can even be more effective sometimes than government responses. Specifically, we were talking about responses to disasters like floods and fires. A couple of the organizations who presented have been engaged in forest restoration, and they've already started to share information about techniques that have been used that lead to higher success rates. There's a general recognition that planting native species is critical to success and relying upon nature itself to restore degraded environments when native species are the ones that are relied on.
Thank you, Catherine. That was, again, I was part of the group, and I must say it was also a very moving session as well. And now to the last but not least, we'll hear from Roger from the Stopping Fossil Fuel Finance Group. Thanks. Over to you, Roger.
Thank you, Tara. We had 4 speakers: Brett Reneckles from Shift, Michelle Marcus from Banking on a Better Future, Marcus Peterson, Decolonial Solidarity, and Guy. All had fabulous input. Britt was part of UBC divestment, how to invest in a low carbon future. The 10-year cumulative return with fossil-free investments was significantly greater than with the existing one that did have fossil investments. Thought that was a very key point. Michelle, with the divestment, how to address RBC, is one of the major criminals in terms of the problems with climate change. The fact that they're actually afraid and have called police on student protests. The third speaker, Marcus, dealing with social and environmental justice, and YRBC. Again, that they are one of the major culprits. Look at the things they've done in British Columbia, up north, and one of the major financiers of Trans Mountain. Guy gave us a really good background on finance. I'd like to know more about the 1-for-1. Don't have the details on that, but how money is created around the world and how easily it is for the banks to then funnel that into traditional fossil fuel investments. How do we collaborate was a good question. So giving financial knowledge so that the pension fund people will have a better understanding as to the problems with climate change, how to get elected to the boards. Apparently they have been appointed by government, so it's time that we take this back. How do we get rid of Fortis BC's investments? Very good question. A letter to executives, a separate session on fossil-free financing. There was a very favorable response to a joint planning group. We had some reflection on our approaches, what is not and what is working. Feeding into the Climate Caucus for a UBC municipalities resolution needs to start soon because that will feed through. The teachers union and others, I think the idea being how to cooperate will be probably a follow-up, but there are individual efforts that we can all do, and that would be to move the money as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thanks for that really exhaustive roundup, Roger. And I can't believe we are at the end nearly. And I'd really, really like to thank everyone. Many Many thanks to our knowledgeable breakout group speakers, facilitators, and note takers, as well as you, the attendees. I mean, this could not have happened without your participation. Now, which is our custom and practice, we will be editing the notes from each of the breakout groups and sending them out to you all in the next couple of weeks. And we all would greatly appreciate if you could fill out a feedback survey about this event. And Mari will just put the survey link in the chat. Please do that so that we can make it much more a more exciting CAPA for you next time. Now I'll pass it over to Guy to take us into the afternoon and end us in a good way. Over to you, Guy.
Thank you, Tara. And by way of wrapping things up, let me share this little piece I got here. So we want to thank Team CAPA, the organizing team that's been working on this for a while, Tara for being such a great MC, Mari for doing all the practical work behind the scenes, all of our presenters, all our facilitators, all our note takers, and you, the participants. And I want to do a special thanks to Mari, because this is the last CAPA Mari will be with us for. She's moving on to higher other prospects. And we want to say how incredibly grateful we are. Getting all choked up here. For the time and the work and the love and the enthusiasm and the dedication that Mari's given us, not just in the CAPAs, but throughout WeCan. And we'll be welcoming Monica Lambton in October to take over from Mari. Big shoes to fill, Monica. So for WeCan ourselves, we have the weekly newsletter. Please, if you want to be in touch with our stuff, subscribe on our website. Just click on the button called newsletter. We have these teams. You can join the team that plans the CAPAs, our local government team, our Indigenous engagement team, our training team, our communications team, our members team, our fundraising team. And this is an old slide. We don't have a food and farming team anymore, but we do actually have a provincial team looking at provincial governments. They're going to be starting hopefully this fall. We do need financing. We need money. So if you can become a monthly donor, there's about 20 of us who are monthly donors through our 100 Friends of WeCan. So technically we're 20 Friends of WeCan. Please help us make it 21 or 22 with a monthly donation. You can go to our website for that. And thank you to everyone for everything. We are together in this. It's such an urgent time. It's such an important issue. It covers the whole of our future existence. Thank you for being with us today, and stay marching. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
And can we have a great big cheer, everybody to come off and thank all the organizers and all the participants, please. Come on.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
From the breathing heart of our remaining forest, within our minds the voice of those who came before us. We're bound together in our struggles and our forces. We rise for life. From the deepest corners of our dying oceans, we come with answers for relations that were broken. We reclaim the land and futures that were stolen. We rise for life. Rise up, stop the violence of toxic industries. Rise up, failing politics are a threat to humanity. Rise up, with people power we build caring communities. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. For a safer world we have to change the system, and the solutions can be found by those who listen to Mother Nature, who provides us with her wisdom. We rise for life. We've seen the cost of greed and its path of desolation. Facing collapse, the first step is reparations. We want to breathe, so don't tell us to be patient. We rise for life. one must fall. Rise up for climate justice and green jobs and homes for all. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. Rooted as a tree, we stand united. With women leading the way out of this crisis. We bring the change that's been envisioned behind our islands. We rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. Stop the violence, toxic industries. Rise up. Failing politics are a threat to humanity. Rise up. With people power we build caring communities. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. Count the bombers and take down racist walls. Rise up. Fossil companies, every single one must fall. Rise up for climate justice and green jobs and hopes for all. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. Rise up. Rise up. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up.
Thanks so much, folks.